So let us, as we talk about central banking, let us be measured in our language. We are not comparing like with like. And I'm saying all this because it is important that we realize and to contextualize this in history, to know our real circumstances. Because history is what gives us the context. That famous Roman orator Cicero once said, if we do not learn from the past, then we remain children forever. We remain adults in diapers. We must look at the past in order to inform the present. But as I said before I went on a tangent, why is Africa always attractive? The game in town now is have you a piece of Africa. That is the new game in town. And it's a game that is being played at all levels. There'll be sugarcoating. You'll be told that there is partnership, but the partnership that Africa has between the West and her is like the partnership between the horse and the rider. That is the relationship. Don't be cheated. Because the reality is we are weak. And in a weak state, we cannot negotiate in monetary terms and in all these terms. We cannot dictate. Standard Bank is over 160 years old. Not an African bank. It may say it is. In its adverts, it will say it is. But I'll not manufacture good news. I'll say it as I see it. It is a foreign bank that has acclimatized, whose DNA is still fundamentally Eurocentric. And that is true of many banks. It has made its own positive contribution. It cannot be denied. But how does Africa benefit? Look at the entire banking sector and the entire banking ecosystem. If you want to move money, it is SWIFT. Think SWIFT is incorporated in Switzerland. Little Switzerland. If I want to move money from South Africa to Nairobi, the Federal Bank of South Africa will ask many questions, and then I'll provide a SWIFT number. Then the intermediary bank will be in New York, not in Mozambique, in New York. If it is going to Europe, it is IBAN. We are not in control. I listened to the panel, and I respect all of them. They are talking about clouds. Whose clouds? Whose clouds? They are talking about digitization. Whose digitization? They are talking about cryptocurrency. Whose cryptocurrency? You can be switched off in the twinkling of an eye and you are back in the dark ages. That is the reality. There's a saying in my mother tongue. When you are milking a borrowed cow, you must always look towards the gate because the owner may come at any time. And I'm saying that Africa is milking borrowed cows. It is milking borrowed cows, and we must be on the lookout. You know, I believe it can be done. Because during my own lifetime, still talking about the attractiveness of Africa, I've seen the Chinese rise on their own terms. The Indians are now beginning to rise on their own terms. But Africa does not rise on our own terms. She's defined by others and she accepts that definition. I'm suggesting that this is the forum at which we must ask fundamental questions if we want to really revolutionize Africa so that the work that you do will be beneficial to the continent of Africa. You know, mobile money is good. Old people in my rural village can receive money from me even as I sit here. But which is the medium? Safaricom it is called. But who is the bigger shareholder? Vodafone of the United Kingdom. I'll be told that is globalization. But what is globalization? This thing we call globalization, what is it? First of all, we are using English words. And somebody once told me that no civilization can ever realize our potential using the language of another. There is merit in that. We Africans think that if you speak good English, then you are intelligent, or French, or Portuguese. That you cannot be intelligent when you are speaking isiZulu and isiXhosa. But anyway, it is useful we are speaking it now. I'm suggesting that when we look at globalization and we talk about the banking sector being globalized, we must also look at the adaptability of the global aspects to the unique African markets. And those African markets must be markets that begin to work together. Because if Africans continue to work as they are in these little units that you have, then let me tell you, you will be dominated, as indeed you are being dominated. I go back to 1963. We recognized that if we worked as a team, then we would not be susceptible to manipulation. So going forward, what must we do? Africa must begin to wean herself off the breasts of foreign systems, but borrow from them. Right now, indeed, as we were driving here, I saw 2 Chinese banks. They are here, just Chinese. And imagine when the Chinese are in Africa, who gets annoyed? Not us. It's the Americans. They are very angry. Because you are reducing the size of their pie. So what must Africa do? Africa has thought about it. Africa Agenda 2063, which came into force in the year 2013, was one of the emblematic resolutions by the African continent that going forward, we are going to make sure that the African continent becomes a continent that is a major player in the international arena. And these are the 7 pillars that we are going to use to undergird our desire to move in the right direction. I did not see emphasis in the financial sector. But the financial sector is this sector. And I hope that when it is being implemented, my friend Wamkele Mene, I'm told, was here, that when Africa Agenda 2063 is being implemented, that one of the critical things would be moving towards having a common financial policy, a common banking policy, which is not blind to the nuances of the different communities in the continent of Africa. The Europeans have done it. There are 27 member countries under the euro. Even weak countries such as Greece were brought together. How many of you will forget how the Italian lira used to be? It used to be like the Zimbabwean bond. How many of you will forget how the Spanish peseta used to be? But one magnet country in the name of Germany brought them together, and today the euro competes side by side with the dollar because they recognize if you are going it alone, then you are weak. Africa must begin to move in that direction. Suppose we had one currency. But before I go into that one currency, The Africa Agenda 2063 provides us with an opportunity of ensuring that we have these ideas that we want to give practical meaning. Africa is too divided. Right now, there are over 8 regional communities in Africa. You start with the Maghreb, which puts up the Arab there, the Arabs in the north, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. Then you go to ECOWAS. Then you come here in SADC. Then you go to East African Community, you go to the Central Africa. All these RECs doing their own things. But the most important thing is that we must begin to read from the same script, because under Africa Agenda 2063, we also say that we want to have Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Free trade area. Free trade area where if I go to Namibia, I'm asked, what has brought you here? And I'm from Kenya. Free trade area where we still have visa regimes. Free trade area where we still have all these tariff and non-tariff barriers. Free trade area where our currency of trade is the United States dollars. You cannot do it. We must begin, and you bankers must begin to think about it. You'll tell me we have RTGS. South Africa is now settling things through RTGS, but that depends on the mood of South Africa. If South Africa becomes moody, then everything goes haywire. We must have something that is a lot more stable. And I'm suggesting to you that you who are the central bankers and commercial bankers are the ones who are in the best place to articulate these things working with universities. But African universities, if you go to departments of economics, they're still reading the works of John Maynard Keynes and Adam Smith. Not from a historical perspective. It is as if it's freshly baked ideas of economic governance. And Michael Todaro. I'm suggesting to us that there is an opportunity for Africa to do things if it is united in that regard. Which then brings me to what is it in practical terms that Africa must therefore begin to do, particularly from the perspective of you who are in central banking and you who are in the space, which space is significant as we want to push Africa forward. As I've already indicated, many African institutions are not homegrown. And those of you who are from the United States of America and familiar with African history, African-American history, will remember a man called John Henry Clark. John Henry Clark said, and I agree with him, that when African countries regained independence, each one of them adopted a system that was borrowed from their former colonizers, a mimicry of it. And he went on to say that none of the African countries will ever succeed on the basis of those systems. I agree. Look at any African country. When you think that you have cured a wound, a new and even bigger wound appears. Why? Because the fundamentals are not known to you. Because the entire underpinning issues are not of your own. Right now, as I speak to you, you will see, and sometimes I annoy people, and I will do so this very minute. You will see the former Prime Minister of Britain called Mr. Tony Blair. One time in 1980, he said that Africa is a scar on the conscience of the world. One of the most painful statements I've ever heard, condescending. And any sensible Africa took umbrage. Today, Tony Blair is the advisor of many African countries. And some of you will come from central banks where Tony Blair is advising. Do you think he advises your central bank for your benefit? No, he cannot. He does it for the benefit of his country. And do I begrudge him? No.